The South Sydney Rabbitohs, the club who had the most drastic fall from grace in NRL history, but it's okay because Cameron Murray is as hot as ever. There wasn't much glory for South Sydney in 2023, at least not in the second half of the season. Souths were famously in first place in round 11 with all 3 byes yet to come. But the famous old outfit managed only 4 more wins between then and round 27, culminating in a round 27 loss against arch rivals the Roosters for a spot in the finals. But the other side to that downfall is just how good Souths were in the first half of the season. At the end of Magic Round, Souths had beaten Penrith, Brisbane and Melbourne in their last 3 games. There wasn't a team out there who you'd have tipped to beat them, and you'd have been rightfully checked into an insane asylum if you were to predict what actually happened to them in the rest of the year. It's very hard to see them missing the finals again in 2024. With the team they have on paper and the general winning mentality and expectation of the Rabbitohs, you'd expect them to be there. If we see the best version of South Sydney turn up, with Jack Whiten thrown into the mix, they've got enough talent on field to beat anybody. And with Father Time drawing ever closer to the likes of Cody Walker, Damien Cook and Tom Burgess, this is a year that they have to make the most of. I always start these previews by giving my take on the biggest gain of the season for the club. Yeah, with South Sydney, it's not exactly insightful, is it? It's obviously Jack Whiten. The man is waving goodbye to Canberra, where he has spent the duration of his career, heading up to Redfern in search of a premiership that has eluded him up to this point. He's played 5/8 in clubland for a long time now, but at representative level he has always been a centre for both New South Wales and the Kangaroos, and that's the role he'll be filling for South Sydney. It's a real luxury to be able to have a player of that calibre playing out in the outside backs, and from that perspective it's a fantastic signing. If Campbell Graham had been fit for the majority of this season, having him on one edge and Jack Whiten on the other, that's probably the most formidable centre pairing in the competition. Obviously the friendship between him and Latrell Mitchell is very well documented, and the hope for South Sydney fans will be that that relationship can help them get the best out of one another this season. He's another one of these guys that South Sydney has that is a little bit older, coming towards the end of his career, so that hunger and more appropriately that desperation to win the premiership while the opportunity is still there, it's very important, and it's going to be motivating for those guys this year. Coming up against South Sydney, you have to focus on the likes of Latrell Mitchell, Cody Walker, Damien Cook, but you got to only focus your efforts in so many places, and those guys commanding that much attention could really free up Jack Whiten. The biggest loss for me is definitely Hame Sele. He's been an important forward for them in recent years, a very good clubman, one of these guys who you kind of need there, part of your roster, who will just do a good job for you, high quality play. He's been a very good serviceable player for the Rabbitohs. They have recruited Sean Keppie to fill that gap, and Keppie is a guy who I think is not necessarily like for like, but in terms of quality they're at a similar level, and I think that they won't miss Hame Sele too much in that regard. My first talking point for the Rabbitohs though, and it is a big one, is does Latrell dominate? Now I should probably clarify what I mean by that, because when you're looking at dominant players in the NRL, Latrell is well and truly high up that list. On his day, I don't think there's anyone more unstoppable than Latrell Mitchell. But that's the key, on his day. And if you're going to be winning premierships and you're one of the star players, you pretty much got to be having your days consistently every week. This will now be Latrell's 9th season of first grade. That is a long time, and if you haven't nailed down consistency by this point, it is a problem. I don't want to be overly critical of Latrell, because God knows there's enough people that do that already, but this comes from a place of recognizing his ability and knowing that, Jesus Christ, if this guy played at his best or near his best every week, he'd be by far and away the best back in the NRL. Consistency is not an unreasonable expectation to have. There are very many less talented guys on the trail in the NRL who are consistent hard workers who apply themselves, and that's how they're playing at this level. By no means is Latrell going to go down as a wasted talent. The guy already has won 2 premierships in his career. But my point is that if we look back on him as anything less than one of the best fullbacks in rugby league history, I do think that'll be a bit disappointing. I think he's got the ability to match, if not surpass, GI, but I'll ask you the question, do you think that if he continues playing at this level and retires, he will be looked at in a higher light than Greg Inglis? I don't think so. And that is a huge expectation. Don't get me wrong, I'm comparing him to an absolutely elite player, but it's just the esteem I hold Latrell in and the admiration I have for his ability. The next talking point is about a guy who is just coming into his time in the NRL. It is, can Tallis Duncan deliver this early in his career? Now, we saw a bit of Tallis Duncan last year. I think everyone remembers that length of the field try against the Canterbury Bulldogs to almost seal a comeback. There was talk that he may be starting on an edge for the Rabbitohs this year. That looks unlikely given their trial team having named Jai Arrow on that edge. But if his development in the NRL can be fast-tracked a little and he can become the explosive edge back rower that a lot of people are saying that he will, he could become really, really important for the Rabbitohs very quickly. If it gets to a point where the Rabbitohs can rely on Duncan to play that second rower role and let Jai Arrow come through the middle, they become an entirely different team and one that is a lot more dangerous. Obviously, the way I frame that is putting a lot of pressure on a guy who is almost a rookie, but that's the kind of impact he can have this year. I fully believe that. And of course, as everyone seems to say when they're finished talking about Tallis Duncan, he was signed over from the Sydney Roosters. So if he can become a really good player for the Rabbitohs, that's another one that they can hold over their arch rivals. My last talking point is a big one. It goes straight to the top. Is Jason Demitriou under pressure? Now, teams notoriously struggle with life after Wayne Bennett, and Demitriou did a pretty good job dealing with that in the first season of his NRL coaching career, taking the Rabbitohs to a preliminary final. But they were a side that had made the grand final the year before and welcomed back Latrell Mitchell into the side. Obviously, Adam Reynolds was a big loss and one that was difficult to deal with, but still, a preliminary final would have been satisfactory for the Rabbitohs. Whereas the capitulation of last season and the way that it all got leaked out into the media, the way it was all handled in that sense, that was very much below satisfactory levels for the South Sydney club. It's one of the biggest coaching roles in the NRL. There is a lot of expectation that'll be on you, and if you're not delivering consistently good results, there will be pressure on your position. I realize that's blunt, but in the NRL you have to be ruthless if you're going to win a premiership, and South Sydney have a unique way of running things at the moment that's not necessarily like Penrith and Brisbane. They have their players on a little bit of a looser leash, which is fine and it has been successful for them in the past, but if it proves to be unsuccessful again next year, they could definitely see reason to change that system up. So this is my best 17 for the Rabbitohs this year. A few things to talk about. First of all, the number 4 position, Campbell Graham. I realise he is currently suffering a long-term injury, but obviously when he is ready and fit to play, he is one of South Sydney's best players, one of the best centres in the NRL, so he will walk into that team. On the wing, I have Isaiah Tass. Now, this mostly comes from last year. I thought Tass was very good, very consistent, and I don't quite have the heart to drop him, but obviously Tyrone Munro was very good in the opportunities that he had last year. He's a bit more of a specialist winger as well. So a lot of people do prefer Munro. I have a little bit of a concern with the back three of Mitchell, Johnston and Munro. I don't see a lot of meterage coming out of those three compared to, take Penrith, who have Edwards, To'o and Taruva last season making loads and loads of ground out of the back end of the field. So that is a bit of a concern, and Tass would be a bit of an improvement in that sense, but it depends what kind of game plan Demitriou is looking to go with. And then finally, the 12th position, Tallis Duncan, who I have just spoken about. I would be starting him personally. I obviously don't know how he's going in training. Perhaps Arrow is going better, but I like the idea of giving him as much opportunity as possible at the start of the year so that he learns his lessons at this point rather than bringing him into the squad in the back end of the season and still having a little bit of a teething process when it really matters in finals footy. As I mentioned earlier, I do really struggle to see South Sydney missing at the finals again this year, and I do think they can go as high as around 4th place, but I do have to predict them in that lower half of the top 8 for now. Finishing in the top 4 takes a heap of consistency, and as I've alluded to numerous times in this video, I'm just not sure I've seen that yet from the Rabbitohs. But let me know what your thoughts are on South Sydney. Is this the year of Latrell? Does he consistently dominate? And is Jason Demitriou under pressure if this year does not go to plan? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.